Chanting "Armed Forces Save Brazil," protesters fill the streets of Rio de Janeiro. Demonstrations are dwindling after right-wing President Jair Bolsonaro called for protests over his election loss to end. But some of the incumbent's supporters are holding strong.
We are fighting here up to the last minute for us to be able to turn this situation around.
Calling for the military to intervene and overturn the election results.
We are not ready to live the reality of a person convicted of a crime being president. It risks running Brazil into a dictatorship.
President-elect Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva garnered 50.9% of the vote to Mr. Bolsonaro's 49.1%, marking the tightest presidential race since the country returned to democracy. There had been widespread concerns Mr. Bolsonaro would challenge the results, but he has authorised the transition of power to the leftist leader to begin.
Our job is to unite Brazil, to work and have a schedule of propositions to improve people's lives. Let's move forward. The transition has started and we'll do it the best way possible.
Mr. Da Silva's inauguration will take place on January the 1st. He's promising to overturn many of Mr. Bolsonaro's policies, including pro-gun measures and weak protections of the Amazon forest. But there are concerns about the ease with which he will be able to govern. Sarah Jane Bell, ABC News.
Supporters of President Jair Bolsonaro gathered in the streets, a way to protest the results of Sunday's presidential election. They're waiting for President Bolsonaro to tell them what to do. They're convinced Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was elected president by committing fraud.
The election isn't over. We want a third round. We're not going to give the country to a thief so that we become Venezuela. He was sentenced to prison and was freed by a friend.
They have brought food to remain on the roads, but are still uncertain about what to do next.
Truck drivers who support President Jair Bolsonaro were blocking this road that connects the capital, Brasilia, with other parts of the country. They were removed by the police using tear gas. This is an example of the extreme polarization that exists in this country and how there's lots of people here that are not happy with Sunday's results.
There are roadblocks in several parts of the country. A close ally of Lula da Silva compared them to Donald Trump supporters who tried to take over U.S. Congress when Joe Biden won the presidency.
We want a military intervention because we can't accept these results. Lula is a thief and he should be in prison.
On Monday, there was little activity at the Planalto presidential palace. Jair Bolsonaro was there, but chose once again not to speak. The president's silence only adds up to the tension that has prevailed throughout the electoral process. His sons, who are members of Congress, expressed their support for their father on Twitter. One of them wrote, "Dad, I am with you for whatever is coming next." But while the incumbent president remains quiet, President-elect Lula da Silva has already started planning his cabinet and talking to leaders around the world, including a meeting with Argentina's President Alberto Fernández. Analysts say one of his top priorities should be ending the depolarization that exists in this country today.
It is clear that this final result shows a divided country, divided regionally, divided between the states that makes up the Brazilian Federation, and a division within society, and even among families, which make the first task of the new president-elect to seek to establish an agenda proposal to reduce this political polarization.
Jair Bolsonaro has 2 months left in office. Everyone is waiting to hear what he has to say about the election, and whether his message will bring reconciliation or sow further divisions within Brazilian society. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Lusania, Brazil.
Well, that's how it's supposed to work.
What is this? What is going on here? We're a week from the election, 6 days. Biden could have given would, under normal circumstances, have given a speech about his policies and how they've made your life better. He tried to convince you this country is actually in better shape than it looks, and he did that. He could, in other words, have made a pitch for your vote based on what he has done. That's what politicians do in functioning democracies. They try to convince you to support them on the basis of what they have done for you. That is democracy. That's not at all what Joe Biden just did. Instead, Biden commanded you to accept the election results whenever they arrive, no matter what they may be. It was bizarre, and it did not inspire confidence. You would hate to think that what's happening here is a version of what is happening tonight in Brazil. According to official tallies, a convicted criminal and avowed socialist called Lula da Silva beat the incumbent president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, by a narrow margin this weekend. And yet millions of Brazilians, millions, don't believe that's what actually happened. Bolsonaro himself has not conceded. There are protests all over Brazil right now. You're seeing some of them on your screen right now. There are questions about whether all the ballots have been counted, why so many were thrown out, millions, and whether election laws were violated in the process. So we can't render judgment on those questions, but if you care about democracy, if you think the process is essential, then you would look into those allegations. Anything less is not democracy. And yet what's interesting, and maybe a point of concern for the rest of us here in the US, is that you are no longer allowed to ask questions about this election in Brazil. And you're not allowed because the Biden administration doesn't want you to. That's true. YouTube, which has functioned for the last 2 years as an arm of the Biden administration, has announced it is censoring any posts in Brazil that question the election results. Brazil's courts have also rejected any inquiry into the election. In fact, a Supreme Court judge in Brazil has also ordered social media companies to remove any social media post that questions the outcome. Overwhelming censorship in a, quote, democracy, preventing people from asking questions about how the, quote, democracy functions. So why should you care about this? Brazil, it's a long way away. Well, 2 reasons. The first is that the result of this election will determine the extent of China's influence in the Western Hemisphere. If Bolsonaro is determined the loser, and da Silva does become the president of Brazil, that means that left-wing governments loyal to China outside of our sphere of influence will control all of South America. Brazil was the last holdout, also the biggest and most significant country in South America. Bolsonaro alone in South America stood in the way of total Chinese hegemony there. It's our hemisphere. It matters. But the second reason you should be paying attention to this is that the crackdown on free speech in the wake of Brazil's contested election.
The president's office may have conceded defeat, but many of Jair Bolsonaro's millions of supporters have not. They took to the streets of Sao Paulo in their thousands. The national flag waved above the crowds as they gathered outside the headquarters of the military's Southeastern Command. They're calling for an intervention. Put simply, they want a military coup. They despise the leftist policies of Lula da Silva, and they want him out by any means.
He cannot take the power. The people is on the street. We want the military take over and do no election, you know?
We are defending our, how can I say, liberty, property, family, and our people, our family are above all. And no communism, please. We must to fight until we give our liberty.
Que a gente não concorda com a decisão eleitoral. A gente está fazendo uma manifestação pacífica aqui para ver se a gente consegue reverter esse quadro aí. A gente não concorda com isso, a gente acha que não dá certo um cara que saiu da cadeia governar o nosso país. Eu não concordo com isso.